Jake Morrison stood in front of the biggest meeting room he had ever seen. The walls stretched up so high that he could barely see the ceiling. Around him sat creatures that looked like they came from his worst nightmares and best dreams at this same time. The Zephyrians floated in glass tanks filled with blue gas. Their bodies looked like living crystals that changed colors when they thought. Jake could feel their minds pressing against his, trying to read his thoughts. It made his head hurt. On his left, the Karathi clicked their forearms together. They looked like giant ants, but smart ants that built spaceships and flew between stars. Their black eyes reflected the light as they watched him with interest. That felt more like hunger. The Valdorians were the strangest of all. Sometimes Jake could see them clearly, looking like tall humans made of light. Other times they faded away until only their voices remained, speaking in tones that sounded like music and wind. "Begin your presentation, human," said Ambassador Vex of the Karathi. His voice buzzed like 1,000 insects, talking at once. Jake took a deep breath and looked at his notes. His hands shook a little, but he tried to hide it. Behind him, Dr. Lisa Kane gave him an encouraging nod. She was the smartest person he knew, and if she believed he could do this, maybe he could. "Thank you for letting us share our culture with you," Jake began. "Humans have always told stories about heroes and gods. These stories have been with us since we first learned to speak." He pressed a button on his device, and pictures appeared in the air above the meeting table. The first image showed a man stealing fire from the gods. "This is Prometheus," Jake said. "In our old stories, he was a god who felt sorry for humans. We were cold and afraid in the dark. So Prometheus stole fire from the other gods and gave it to us. The gods punished him by chaining him to a rock where an eagle ate his liver every day. But it grew back every night, so his torture never ended." The Zephyrian's crystals flashed with what Jake thought might be amusement. One of them spoke without moving its mouth, the words appearing directly in Jake's mind. "Your species created stories about gods who suffered for you. How quaint." Jake felt his face get hot, but he continued. The next image showed a man with a sling facing a giant. "This is David and Goliath." David was just a young man, but he faced a giant warrior that no one else dared to fight. Everyone said David would die, but he believed he could win, and he killed the giant with just a stone from his sling. The Karathi made clicking sounds that Jake realized was laughter. "Small human defeats large enemy with primitive weapon. Yes, we understand your species enjoys impossible fantasies." The Valdorians flickered in and out of sight. When they were visible, Jake could see expressions that looked like adults watching children play pretend. Jake showed more images. Hercules lifting the world, Odysseus tricking the gods themselves, Thor fighting monsters with his hammer, Achilles being almost impossible to kill except for one small spot on his heel. With each story, the alien laughter grew louder. The Zephyrians' crystals flashed brighter. The Karathi clicked their arms faster. Even the serious Valdorians began to fade away completely, as if the stories were too boring to hold their attention. "These are wonderful entertainment," said the Zephyrian speaker. "Your species has such creative imagination. We especially enjoy how your heroes always win against impossible odds. Very amusing." Ambassador Helen Wright, who led the human delegation, kept her face calm, but Jake could see her hands squeezed together under the table. She was angry, but she was too professional to show it. Dr. Lisa Kane leaned forward. "These stories are important to us. They teach us about courage and hope. They show us that even when things look hopeless, we should never give up." "Yes," buzzed Ambassador Vex. "Very inspiring for a young species. When you have lived for thousands of years like we have, you learn that hope is just another word for not understanding reality. A Valdorian voice spoke from somewhere Jake could not see. We have faced real cosmic threats, little humans. We have seen stars die and civilizations end. Your stories of mortals challenging gods are charming, but they have no place in the real universe. Jake felt something burning in his chest. These aliens were treating humans like children who believed in fairy tales. They acted like they were so much smarter and stronger that human stories were just cute jokes. Our myths matter to us, Jake said, his voice getting stronger. They tell us who we are. They remind us that humans have always fought against things bigger and stronger than us. And we have always found a way to win. The room went quiet for a moment. Then the laughter started again, louder than before. Of course you have always won, said the Zephyrian. In your stories, in your imagination. But stories are not reality. Young human. The meeting ended soon after. Jake packed up his presentation with shaking hands. He had practiced this speech for months, but it had gone worse than his worst nightmares. The aliens were not just unimpressed. They thought human culture was a joke. That evening, Jake sat in the human quarters with Lisa and Helen. The space station was huge, but their rooms felt tiny compared to the grand chambers where the aliens lived. They think we are idiots, Jake said, staring out the window at the stars. They think we are children, Lisa corrected. There is a difference. Helen was reading reports on her computer. Her face looked tired. The Korathi delegation has already sent our presentation to their entertainment networks. They are calling it the Primitive Human Comedy Hour. Jake felt sick. What? It gets worse, Helen continued. The Zephyrians have shared our myths with their philosophers as examples of pre-logical thinking, and the Valdorians have classified our entire culture as developmentally delayed. Lisa threw her tablet down on the table. This is not fair. Every species has myths and legends. Why? Are ours so funny to them? Because theirs came true, Helen said quietly. Jake and Lisa stared at her. Think about it, Helen explained. The Zephyrians really can read minds and move things with their thoughts. The Korathi really do share a group consciousness that lets them work as one. The Valdorians really can exist as pure energy. Their myths became their reality through science and evolution. So our myths are just stories, Jake said. That is what they think, Helen replied. To them, we are the species that tells stories about impossible things instead of actually doing impossible things. Jake looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there were billions of aliens who now thought humans were primitive joke-tellers. The species that barely learned to travel between planets was trying to impress civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. Maybe they are right, he said. Maybe, Helen said. Or maybe they just have not seen what happens when humans really need to be heroes. Her computer beeped with an incoming message. Helen read it, and her face went pale. What is it? Lisa asked. Message. From Earth, Helen said. Long-range sensors have detected something at the edge of our space. Something big. Something that should not be there. She looked up at Jake and Lisa. And it is heading toward inhabited systems. Jake felt that burning feeling in his chest again. But this time, it was not anger or embarrassment. It was something else. Something that reminded him of all those old stories about heroes who were just ordinary people until the moment they needed to be more. I guess we will find out if our myths mean anything after all, he said. Outside their window, the stars seemed to flicker, as if something vast was moving between them and the light. The first colony to die was New Singapore, a mining station on the edge of human space. Admiral Ryan Clark watched the recording of its final transmission on the bridge of his ship, the Titan. The message lasted only 3 minutes, but those 3 minutes changed everything. This is Colony Manager Beth Harris, the woman on the screen said. Her face was calm, but her eyes showed pure terror. We are under attack by unknown vessels. They are not responding to any communication attempts. The camera shook as explosions rocked the station. Through the windows behind Beth, Ryan could see ships that looked like they were made of black metal and sharp edges. They moved in perfect formation, cutting through the colony's defenses like they were made of paper. The attackers are not just destroying our facilities, Beth continued, her voice getting higher. They are consuming them. The metal, the rock. Everything is being absorbed into their ships. The transmission cut to static. New Singapore was gone. 2 million people vanished in less than an hour. Ryan turned off the recording and looked at his officers. How many colonies have we lost now? 17, said Commander Kate Sullivan, his second in command. All on the outer rim. The pattern is always the same. The attackers arrive, destroy everything in the system, and then disappear. Nothing is left behind. Not even debris. Captain Danny Walsh, the fleet's best scout pilot, raised his hand. Sir, what are we calling these things? My pilots need a name for the enemy. Ryan thought about the recordings they had seen. Ships that ate everything in their path. Machines that turned entire worlds into fuel for their expansion. We will call them Devourers, he said. The name stuck. Within days, every human in the galaxy knew about the Devourers. But humans were not the only ones watching the attacks with growing fear. On the research vessel Horizon, Dr. Peter Walsh was studying ancient ruins on a dead planet called Kepler 442b. The planet had been empty for thousands of years, but the stone carvings in its cities told a story that made Peter's blood run cold. The carvings showed scenes of destruction. Ships that looked exactly like the Devourers attacking worlds full of life. But these images were not recent. According to the dating equipment, they were over 50,000 years old. Lisa, you need to see this, Peter said into his communication device. Dr. Lisa Kane was back on the space station, but she could see everything through the video link. What am I looking at? Lisa asked. Peter pointed to a series of carved symbols. This is a historical record. These people faced the same enemy we are facing now. But look at this part. He showed her carvings of small figures standing against the Devourer ships. The figures were tiny compared to the massive enemy vessels, but they were not running away. They were fighting back. The small figures here, Peter explained, they are not just fighting. They have something around them, some kind of energy or power that the Devourers cannot handle. Lisa leaned closer to her screen. What kind of power? I'm not sure, but look at this word that keeps appearing. Peter pointed to a symbol that was carved deeper than the others, as if whoever made it thought it was very important. I have seen this symbol on runes from 12 different worlds. My translation program says it means the fire of defiance. Before Lisa could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the space station. Emergency broadcasts were coming in from all over the galaxy. The Galactic Council was calling for an emergency meeting. The Devourers had attacked their first major world, and the results were worse than anyone had imagined. The planet was called Serenity, and it was home to the Karathi's biggest military base. 5 million Karathi soldiers lived there, along with their most advanced weapons and ships. If any world could defend itself against the Devourers, it should have been Serenity. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, Serenity was gone. Not destroyed, but completely gone. Where a planet had been, there was now empty space. The Devourers had consumed everything, down to the last atom dot in the Galactic Council chambers. Panic was replacing the usual calm discussions. The Zephyrian's crystals flashed in patterns that showed extreme stress. The Karathi delegates clicked their arms so fast it sounded like machine gun fire. Even the Valdorians stayed fully visible, too worried to phase. Out of reality. We need to combine our fleets, said Ambassador Vex. Every ship, every weapon. every soldier. This is a threat to all life in the galaxy. Agreed, said the Zephyrian speaker. Our individual militaries are not enough. We must work together. A Valdorian appeared at the center of the room, her light form brighter than usual. We have fought together before in the ancient wars. We can do it again. Admiral Ryan Clark stood up. Around him, the alien representatives turned to look at the human delegation. 3 months ago, they had been laughing at human myths. Now they were looking at humans like they might actually be useful. Earth offers all of our ships and personnel, Ryan said. We may not have the biggest fleet, but we will do our part. Ambassador. Vex's mandibles clicked in what might have been gratitude. Your ships can provide support roles. Supply runs, medical assistance, communications. Ryan felt the same burning feeling that Jake had experienced during his presentation. The aliens were still treating humans like they were barely worth noticing. Even facing a galaxy-ending threat, they saw humans as useful only for carrying supplies. But he kept his anger hidden. Whatever you need, he said. Commander Kate Sullivan was leading a scouting mission when she made the discovery that changed everything. Her ship, the Defiant, was one of humanity's newest vessels. It used technology the human engineers had, created by combining alien innovations with their own ideas. Kate's mission was simple: get close to a Devourer fleet and gather information. She was not supposed to engage the enemy, just watch and report. But what she saw made her forget all about orders. Devourer fleet was attacking a civilian transport convoy. Hundreds of ships full of families trying to escape the outer rim. Systems. The Devourers were picking them off one by one, consuming each ship completely. We have to help them, said Lieutenant Carl Newton, Kate's weapons officer. Our orders are to observe only, Kate replied. But she was watching the transport ships die, and each explosion felt like a knife in her chest. Captain, said her science. Officer, Dr. Rebecca Stone. I am detecting something strange about the Devourer attack pattern. What do you mean? Rebecca pulled up readings on the main screen. They are not just destroying the ships. They are feeding on something else. Some kind of energy that the people inside are producing. Kate studied the readings. What kind of energy? Fear, Rebecca said quietly. They are feeding on fear and despair. The more hopeless the victims feel, the stronger the Devourers become. Kate stared at the screen. The transport ships had stopped trying to run. Their pilots had given up, accepting that they were going to die. And as they gave up hope, the Devourer ships grew brighter and moved faster. That is impossible, Carl said. Machines cannot eat emotions. These are not just machines, Rebecca replied. They are something else. Something that gets stronger when people lose hope. Kate made a decision that would have gotten her court-martialed under normal circumstances. She opened a communication channel to the transport convoy. All ships, this is Commander Kate Sullivan of the Earth Defense Force. Do not give up. Keep fighting. Run if you can. Fight if you cannot run. But do not give up hope. What are you doing? Carl asked. Testing a theory, Kate said. She turned on the ship's external speakers and started playing music. Old human songs about never surrendering, about fighting against impossible odds, about heroes who refused to quit. Something amazing happened. The transport ships started moving again. Their pilots found new energy, new hope. They began running and fighting with renewed strength. And the Devourer ships began to slow down. It is working, Rebecca whispered. The Devourers are getting weaker. They cannot process the energy from people who refuse to give up. Kate felt something she had never felt before. It was like a fire burning in her chest, but it did not hurt. It felt like strength and courage and something else. Something that reminded her of all the old stories. Her grandmother used to tell stories about heroes who never gave up. No matter what, the Defiant limped back to the human fleet with critical intelligence. But when Kate presented her findings to the Galactic Council, the response was exactly what she expected. Emotional energy as a weapon? The Zephyrian speaker's crystals flashed with what looked like amusement. Commander Sullivan, this is not a fantasy story. This is real war. The readings do not lie, Kate insisted. The Devourers feed on despair. Hope and defiance make them weaker. Ambassador Vex clicked his mandibles dismissively. Korathi military doctrine is based on logic and calculated strategy. We do not fight with hope. We fight with superior firepower and tactical planning. The Valdorian representative flickered in and out of sight. These are emotional responses, human. They have no place in logical defense strategies. Kate felt that burning sensation growing stronger. These aliens, even facing extinction, refused to consider that they might be wrong about humans. What if our myths were not just stories? She asked. What if they were instructions for how to fight enemies like this? The room fell silent. Then the laughter started, just like it had during Jake's presentation. Now you sound like your mythology. The greatest fleet in galactic history gathered in the Kepler Nebula. Ships from every major civilization floated in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready. The combined fleet had enough firepower to destroy entire solar systems. General. Amanda Foster watched the preparations from the command center of the human carrier Independence. Around her, the most advanced military minds in the galaxy worked together for the first time in centuries. It should have been a moment of hope and unity. Instead, Amanda felt a cold dread growing in her stomach. Final fleet count, Admiral. Her communications officer reported. 2,000 Zephyrian mind-link vessels, 1,500 Korathi bioships, 800 Valdorian energy cruisers, and ... He paused. 47 human ships, Amanda nodded. 47 ships out of over 4,000. Even now, with the galaxy facing extinction, the humans were still treated as barely worth counting. Enemy contact in 10 minutes, called out the tactical officer. Devourer fleet is approaching from multiple vectors. Through the main viewing screen, Amanda could see the enemy. The Devourer ships looked like massive black spiders made of metal and shadow. They moved in patterns that hurt to watch, flowing through space like liquid death. The alien fleet commanders were confident. They had run the calculations dozens of times. Superior numbers, superior technology, superior tactics. The battle should be over in hours, with minimal losses to the galactic forces. They were wrong about almost everything. The battle began with the Zephyrians making the first attack. Their mind-linked ships moved as one, guided by the perfect telepathic connection between their crews. Thousands of crystal beings thinking as a single organism, controlling their weapons with precision that no individual pilot could match. The Zephyrian attack was beautiful to watch. Energy beams lanced out in perfect patterns, hitting the Devourer ships exactly where their calculations said the enemy was weakest. For a moment, it looked like the predictions were correct. Then the Devourers began to adapt. What is happening? To the Zephyrian fleet? Amanda asked her sensor operator. Their mind link is destabilizing, came the reply. The crews are becoming disconnected from each other. Amanda watched in horror as the perfect formation of Zephyrian ships began to fall apart. The crystal beings were panicking, their telepathic screams of terror, creating feedback loops that paralyzed entire squadrons. They are seeing the mathematical impossibility of victory, Dr. Rebecca Stone said. She had been transferred to Amanda's ship to help analyze the enemy. The Zephyrians calculate everything perfectly. When they see that their perfect tactics are not working, their minds cannot handle the contradiction. The Korathi bioships were next. These vessels were grown rather than built, controlled by queens who could coordinate hundreds of ships through biological neural networks. They should have been immune to the fear that was destroying the Zephyrians. But the Karathi queens began making the same calculations as the Zephyrians. They saw the odds, ran the numbers, and reached the same conclusion. A battle could not be won. One by one, the bioships stopped fighting. Their queens fell into a kind of shock, unable to give orders to crews that had lost all hope of survival. The Valdorians lasted longest, but their end was the most tragic of all. These beings existed as pure energy, held together by controlled thought patterns and disciplined meditation. They had conquered death itself by becoming living light, but even energy beings could not maintain their form when faced with absolute despair. As they watched the mathematical certainty of defeat unfold, the Valdorians began to fade from existence. Not killed by enemy weapons, but dissolved by their own loss of hope. In less than 3 hours, the greatest fleet in galactic history was broken. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, with their perfect logic and superior technology, had been defeated not by the enemy's weapons, but by their own inability to accept the impossible. Only the human ships kept fighting. Captain Ben Torres commanded the destroyer Achilles, one of the smallest ships in the entire fleet. His crew was young, most of them fresh out of Earth's military academies. They had no telepathic links, no bioneural networks, no energy-based consciousness. They had something else instead. Captain, we have lost contact with the main fleet. His communications officer reported. All alien vessels are either destroyed or retreating. Ben looked around his bridge. His crew was scared, but they were still at their posts. They had seen the impossible odds, just like everyone else, but they had not given up. "What are your orders, sir?" asked his weapons officer, Lieutenant Mary Santos. Ben thought about all the stories he had heard as a child. Stories about heroes who faced impossible odds and somehow found a way to win. Not because they were stronger or smarter, but because they refused to accept defeat. "We keep fighting," he said. The Achilles dove into the heart of the Devourer formation. Ben's ship was so small compared to the enemy vessels that they almost ignored it at first. But when the Achilles opened fire, something unexpected happened. The human weapons, primitive by galactic standards, actually hurt the Devourers. Not because they were more powerful, but because they were fired by people who absolutely refused to believe they could lose. "How is this possible?" Mary Santos asked as she watched her shots penetrate Devourer armor that had shrugged off Zephyrian. "Energy beams. I do not know," Ben replied, "but keep shooting." The Achilles was not alone. Across the battlefield, other human ships were discovering the same thing. Their weapons worked better than they should. Their shields held longer than the specifications said they could. Their engines pushed them faster than physics said was possible. Lieutenant Colonel Carl Newton was leading a boarding party against a damaged Devourer ship. His Marines were equipped with weapons that were laughably primitive compared to alien technology. But when they stormed through the enemy corridors, the Devourers actually retreated. "These things are afraid of us," Carl radioed back to his ship. "I can see it in the way they move. They do not understand why we are not running away." Carl's team fought their way to the Devourer ship's core systems. The central chamber was filled with machinery that looked like it was grown rather than built. At the center was a pulsing mass of organic circuits that seemed to be the ship's brain. "Plant the charges," Carl ordered as his demolitions expert. Worked. Carl found himself face to face with what looked like the ship's captain. The Devourer was twice his size, with arms that ended in cutting tools and sensors that glowed with malevolent intelligence. The creature studied Carl with obvious confusion. It could read his thoughts, could see that he knew the odds of survival were almost zero. But it could not understand why that knowledge did not paralyze him with despair. Carl smiled at the monster. "You know what your problem is?" he said, You never heard our stories." The charges exploded, tearing the Devourer ship apart from the inside dot back on the Independence. General Amanda Foster was watching her scanners with amazement. The human fleet, outnumbered thousands to one, was actually winning individual battles against the Devourers. "How is this happening?" she asked Dr. Rebecca Stone. "I think Kate Sullivan was right," Rebecca replied. "The Devourers feed on despair and hopelessness. But humans do not know how to be hopeless. Even when we should give up, we keep fighting." Amanda watched as another human ship, the destroyer Ajax, rammed itself into a Devourer mothership. The collision should have been suicide, but somehow the Ajax survived while the much larger enemy vessel broke apart. "It is like our myths are coming true," Amanda whispered. On the research vessel Horizon, Dr. Peter Walsh was making the most important discovery in human history. While the battle raged around him, he had been studying the ancient texts that he found on the dead worlds. The translation was finally complete, and what he found changed everything. "Lisa," he called over the communication link. "I know what the fire of defiance means." Dr. Lisa Kane's voice came back full of static from the space station, which was now under attack by Devourer scouts. "Tell me fast, Peter. We do not have much time. The ancient texts are not describing myths," Peter said, his voice shaking with excitement. "They are describing real events. The Devourers have been here before, many times throughout galactic history. Each time, they were stopped by species that refused to accept defeat." "What happened to those species?" "They transcended," Peter replied. "They became something more than what they were before. The texts call it awakening the God self. I think it means that when a species faces extinction and refuses to surrender, they unlock abilities that they never knew they had." Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Peter, are you telling me that our myths were instruction manuals?" "That is exactly what I am telling you. Every culture had these stories because they were genetic memories. Instructions for what humans could become when everything else failed." The communication link crackled with static as another explosion rocked the space station. "Peter, I have to go. The Devourers are breaking through our defenses." But Peter had one more thing to say. "Lisa, tell everyone you can. The gods in our stories were not fantasy. They were previews. They were showing us what we could be." Across human space, something impossible was beginning to happen. Reports were coming in from every front line, every battle, every desperate last stand. Humans were The transformation spread across human space like wildfire. What started as isolated incidents became a wave of impossible events that no one could explain or deny. On the farming colony of New Eden, Carl Newton was helping evacuate civilians. When the Devourer scouts arrived, the colony's defense grid had been destroyed in the first attack, leaving thousands of people trapped under collapsed buildings. Carl found himself standing in front of a transport ship that had been crushed by falling debris. Inside, he could hear the voices of children calling for help. The ship weighed over 300 tons, and the rescue equipment had been destroyed with everything else. "We need heavy lifting gear," shouted Rebecca Stone, who had arrived with the medical team. "There is no way we can move this manually." Carl stared at the crushed transport. The voices inside were getting weaker. In a few minutes, it would be too late to save anyone. He thought about all the stories his grandfather used to tell him. Stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary strength when others needed them. Stories about heroes who lifted impossible weights and performed impossible feats. "Stand back," Carl said quietly. Rebecca looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Carl, that thing weighs 300 tons. You cannot." Carl was not listening anymore. He placed his hands under the edge of the transport ship and lifted. The ship rose into the air like it was made of cardboard. Carl held it above his head. while the rescue teams pulled the trapped families to safety. When the last person was clear, he gently set the transport back down. Carl stared at his hands. They looked normal, but he could still feel the power flowing through them. It was not gone. It was just waiting for the next time someone needed help. "How did you do that?" Rebecca whispered. "I do not know," Carl replied. "But I think I am starting to understand what our stories were really about." Aboard the medical frigate Mercy, Dr. Rebecca Stone was discovering her own impossible abilities. The ship was full of wounded soldiers from the Kepler Nebula battle. Many of them had injuries that should have been fatal. Rebecca was working on a young pilot named Danny Walsh, who had been caught in a Devourer energy blast. Half of his body was burned beyond what any normal medicine could heal. According to every medical textbook she had ever read, he should have died hours ago, but Rebecca could not accept that. She placed her hands on Danny's wounds and felt something warm flowing from her fingers. A golden light began to glow around her hands, and where the light touched, the burned skin began to heal. "This is impossible," whispered Nurse Lisa Kane, who was helping with the surgery. "Tissue does not regenerate that fast." Rebecca was not thinking about medical science anymore. She was thinking about all the stories of healers who could cure. The incurable, who could bring people back from the edge of death through will and compassion alone. Danny's eyes opened. The burns were completely gone, replaced by healthy pink skin. He sat up on the operating table, looking confused, but perfectly healthy. "What happened to me?" he asked. "You got better," Rebecca said, staring at her hands in wonder. "You got much better." Word of these impossible healings spread through the human fleet faster than official communications. Soon, wounded soldiers from across the battle zone were being brought to Rebecca's ship. Each time, she found that her healing powers grew stronger, but the most dramatic changes were happening to the pilots and ship commanders, who were still fighting on the front lines. Captain Kate Sullivan had always been a good pilot, but now she was something else entirely. Her ship, the Defiant, moved through space like it was dancing. She could navigate through asteroid fields without looking at her instruments, finding paths that her computers said did not exist. "Captain, her navigation." Officer called out, "We are approaching the Devourer patrol fleet. Sensors show 30 enemy vessels in a defensive formation." Kate studied the tactical display, but she was not really seeing it with her eyes. She was seeing it with something deeper, something that let her understand the flow of space and time. Around her ship, "Plot a course through the formation," she ordered. "Ma'am, there is no course. They have us completely surrounded." Kate smiled. "Trust me." The Defiant dove toward the enemy fleet at impossible speed. Just as it seemed certain to crash into the first Devourer ship, Kate twisted her controls in a way that should have torn her vessel apart. Instead, the ship slipped through a gap between enemy vessels that appeared for exactly 1 second. The Defiant danced through the entire enemy formation, somehow always being in the exact spot where the Devourers were not firing. Kate's crew watched in amazement as their ship performed maneuvers that violated everything they knew about physics. "How are you doing this?" asked her weapons officer. "I am not sure," Kate replied, "but I think this is what it feels like to fly like the gods." But the most shocking transformation was happening to Jake Morrison. After his encounter with the Devourer Harvester, he had been rescued by a passing human patrol. But the Jake Morrison who returned was not the same man who had given that embarrassing presentation to the Galactic Council. Jake was standing on the bridge of the rescue ship Odyssey when the captain received an impossible message. It was coming from deep space, from a location where no human ships should exist. "This is Jake Morrison," the message said. "I am returning to human space, and I am not coming alone." Captain Ben Torres, who was commanding the Odyssey, stared at the communication screen. Jake, you are standing right here next to me. How are you sending a message from deep space? Jake smiled, and for a moment, his eyes seemed to glow with an inner light. That is not me out there, Ben. That is what I am becoming. The message continued. Prepare the fleet for my arrival. The enemy thinks they understand humans, but they have never seen what we become when we stop pretending to be normal. 3 days later, something appeared at the edge of human space that made every sensor operator think their equipment was broken. Ships were approaching Earth, but they looked like they had been built from starlight and pure will. The lead vessel looked like a fusion of human engineering and something far more advanced. Its hull seemed to shift between solid metal and pure energy, and it moved through space without visible engines. Jake Morrison's voice came over the communication channels, but it sounded different now, stronger, more confident, like someone who had seen the impossible and decided to make it possible. This is Admiral Morrison, returning from Devourer Space. I bring intelligence that will change how we fight this war. Admiral Ryan Clark, commanding the defense of Earth, opened a channel to the strange fleet. Jake, what happened to you out there? I learned what our myths really meant, Jake replied. The Devourers have been fighting advanced civilizations for millions of years. They always win because advanced civilizations think logically. They calculate the odds and accept defeat when the math says they cannot win. Jake's ship moved closer to the main fleet, and Ryan could see that it was not just one vessel. It was dozens of ships flying in perfect formation, all of them crewed by humans who had somehow transcended normal limitations. But humans do not think logically, Jake continued. We think mythologically. When faced with impossible odds, we do not calculate probabilities. We remember stories about heroes who faced impossible odds and won anyway. Jake, how did you build these ships? We did not build them, Jake replied. We became them. Every human has the potential to be a hero from our old stories. The Devourers have given us the crisis we needed to unlock that potential. Ryan watched as Jake's fleet took position around Earth. Each ship was different, as if they had been shaped by the personalities and dreams of their crews. But they all shared one thing in common. They radiated a power that made the very fabric of space seem to bend around them. The Devourers are coming here, Jake warned. They know that humans are the key to stopping them, so they are bringing everything they have to destroy Earth. But they made one mistake. What mistake? Jake's laughter came over the communication channel, but it was not the desperate laughter of his encounter with the Harvester. This was the laughter of someone who had seen the enemy's greatest weakness and knew exactly how to exploit it. They think destroying Earth will stop us, Jake said. But Earth is not where human power comes from. Human power comes from the stories we tell each other. And those stories are now spread across the entire galaxy. As if summoned by his words, reports began coming in from human colonies throughout the galaxy. On every world where humans lived, impossible things were happening. Ordinary people were displaying extraordinary abilities, but only when facing the Devourers or helping others survive the war. A farmer on New Tokyo lifted a fallen building to save his neighbors. A teacher on Harmony Colony somehow made her voice carry across an entire planet, coordinating evacuation efforts through pure will. A mechanic on Frontier Station repaired a damaged defense grid using nothing but his hands, and an absolute refusal to let his home be destroyed. Dr. Peter Walsh, still studying the ancient texts, finally understood what he was seeing. Lisa, he called over the communication link. The texts talk about something called the awakening. When a species faces extinction and refuses to surrender, they unlock abilities that were always there, hidden in their genetic code. What kind of abilities? The kind that their myths and leg. The final battle began at dawn on Earth's eastern hemisphere. The Devourer fleet that emerged from hyperspace was larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Millions of black ships that blotted out the stars, all converging on the small blue planet that had dared to resist them. Admiral Ryan Clark stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Olympus, but he was no longer commanding a traditional fleet. The ships around Earth moved like living things, their crews operating on instincts that came from somewhere beyond training or experience. Enemy fleet size? Ryan asked his tactical officer. Over 10 million vessels, sir. They have brought everything they have. Ryan nodded. The Devourers were making their final push, gambling everything on destroying the source of humanity's strange power. They had calculated that removing Earth would break the human spirit and return the species to normal limitations. They had never been more wrong about anything. All ships, this is Admiral Clark, Ryan announced over the fleet communication channels. The enemy thinks that destroying our home will break us. They do not understand that Earth is not our source of strength. Our strength comes from who we choose to be. Captain Ben Torres, commanding the destroyer Achilles, felt the familiar fire burning in his chest. Around him, his crew worked with impossible efficiency, their movements perfectly coordinated without any need for orders. Enemy ships entering weapons range, his tactical officer reported. All weapons, fire at will, Ben ordered. But he knew that weapons alone would not win this battle. The human fleet engaged the Devourers across a front that stretched from Earth to the moon. But this was not the same desperate fighting that had marked the earlier battles. The humans who fought now had learned what they were truly capable of. Lieutenant Colonel Mary Santos led a boarding action against a Devourer command ship that was the size of a small city. Her Marines moved through the enemy corridors like ancient warriors, their weapons somehow always finding their targets, their armor somehow always protecting them from fatal hits. "How are we doing this?" one of her soldiers asked as they fought their way toward the ship's core. "We are doing what humans have always done," Mary replied, cutting through a blast door with her bare hands. "We are being the heroes from our own stories." At the center of the enemy ship, they found something that changed everything. A Devourer command center was not just a machine. It was a massive organic brain, connected to every ship in the enemy fleet. It was the source of their coordinated attacks, their ability to adapt to any strategy. But when Mary's team entered the chamber, the brain began to convulse. It could read their thoughts, could see their memories, but it could not understand what it found there. The humans were afraid. They knew they might die. But they were fighting anyway, not because they calculated they could win, but because giving up was not in their nature. "You want to know what makes humans different?" Mary asked the writhing brain. "We do not fight because we think we can win. We fight because it is the right thing to do." She placed explosive charges around the organic command center, but before she could detonate them, something extraordinary happened. The brain began to shut down on its own, overwhelmed by trying to process the contradiction of beings who fought without hope of victory. Across the battlefield, similar scenes were playing out. Human crews were discovering abilities that should not exist. Ships were performing maneuvers that violated physics. Individual humans were doing things that made the legends of ancient heroes seem modest by comparison. Dr. Rebecca Stone had been transferred to a hospital ship near the front lines. As casualties poured in from the battle, she found that her healing abilities had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. She was not just healing wounds now. She was bringing people back from the edge of death itself. "Doctor, this pilot has been declared dead," a nurse said, bringing in another casualty. "His ship exploded. He should not even have a body left." Rebecca placed her hands on the pilot's chest. The golden light that flowed from her fingers was brighter now, warm, enough that everyone in the room could feel it. The dead pilot's eyes opened. He sat up, completely healthy, looking around in confusion. "What happened?" he asked. "You died," Rebecca said simply. "But I brought you back." She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. And for humans, maybe it was Captain Kate. Sullivan was piloting her ship through the heart of the enemy formation when she made a discovery that changed the course of the entire war. Her enhanced senses, her ability to see patterns in space and time, showed her something that the Devourers had been hiding. "Admiral Clark," she called over the communication channels. "The enemy fleet is not really here." "What do you mean, Kate?" "They are projections, echoes. The real Devourer fleet is hiding in a pocket dimension, sending ghost images to fight us while they prepare to destroy Earth with a weapon we cannot see." Kate's ship, the Defiant, began to phase in and out of normal space. She was following the connection between the ghost fleet and their real location, using abilities that she was discovering as she used them. "I can reach them," she announced, "but I need to take my ship into a dimension where physics does not work the same way." "Kate, that is impossible. You will be torn apart." Kate laughed, and her laughter carried all the confidence of every human hero who had ever faced the impossible. "Admiral, impossible is what humans do best." The Defiant vanished from normal space, leaving only a trail of starlight behind. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison was leading his transformed fleet in the strangest battle of the war. His ships were fighting not just the Devourer vessels, but the despair that the enemy fed on. They moved through space trailing energy that looked like hope made visible. "Jake," Admiral Clark called over a private channel, "what are you and your people becoming?" "We are becoming what we were always meant to be," Jake replied. Every human culture had stories about this. Gods walking among mortals, heroes with impossible powers. We thought they were fantasies, but they were prophecies. Jake's ship, which had been built from will and starlight, dove toward the largest concentration of Devourer vessels. As it approached, something remarkable happened. The enemy ships began to break apart, not from weapons fire, but from exposure to something they could not process. "What is happening to them?" Dr. Peter Walsh asked from his research station. "They are encountering pure, undiluted human stubbornness," Jake explained. "The Devourers feed on species that accept defeat when the odds are impossible. But humans never learned how to accept impossible odds. The enemy fleet began to retreat, but they quickly discovered that retreat was not an option. Kate Sullivan's ship emerged from the pocket dimension, bringing with it knowledge of the Devourer's ultimate weakness. "I found their true form," Kate announced to the entire human fleet. "They are not machines. They are not even really alive. They are crystallized despair, given form and purpose. They exist only as long as there are beings in the universe who give up hope." "What does that mean?" Admiral Clark asked. "It means we do not have to destroy them," Kate replied. "We just have to prove that hope is stronger than despair." Across the human fleet, something began to happen that had never occurred in the galaxy's long history. The humans stopped fighting the Devourers and started laughing at them, not the desperate laughter of the doomed, but the confident laughter of a species that had always found humor in the face of the impossible. The laughter of people who looked at an army of nightmare machines and thought, "Is that the best you can do?" The effect on the Devourers was catastrophic. These beings who fed on fear and despair could not process collective human amusement. Their ships began to dissolve, their weapons shut down, their very existence began to unravel. "This is impossible," transmitted the Devourer command frequency. "Your species should be broken. You have seen the mathematical certainty of your defeat." Jake Morrison opened a channel to respond. "You know what your problem is? You never understood. Humans, we do not care about mathematical certainty. We care about happy endings. Happy endings are not logical. They are not based in reality. Maybe not, Jake agreed. But they are what we choose to believe in. And belief, it turns out, is the most powerful force in the universe. The Devourer fleet began to retreat from the Sol system, but they found that retreat was no longer possible. The humans had changed the very nature of the space around Earth. It had become a zone where despair could not exist, where hope was so strong that it had physical force. One by one, the Devourer ships simply stopped existing. Not destroyed, but transformed back into the raw despair they had been made from, which was then dissolved by contact with pure human optimism. The last transmission from the enemy came from their greatest command ship. This outcome was not predicted in any calculation. How did a primitive species defeat us? Jake Morrison, now shining with an inner light that made him look like the gods from ancient stories, gave the final answer. Because we never learned the difference between impossible and difficult. Because we tell stories about heroes who win against impossible odds, and then we decide to be those heroes ourselves. Because when faced with the choice between logic and legends, we choose legends every time. The last Devourer ship faded from existence, taking with it the despair that had fed them for millions of years. In the after.